My name is Lauren. I'm 27, and I live in a quiet little town in Vermont. It's one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and you don't think twice about leaving your door unlocked. I guess I always liked that about this town, how safe it felt, especially around the holidays. But this past Christmas Eve made me realize how quickly that sense of security can vanish. I was hosting a small Christmas Eve dinner for my family at my house. It was just my parents, my younger brother Matt, and me. We'd finished decorating the tree earlier that day, and the house smelled of pine and cinnamon candles. It was cozy and warm, the way Christmas should feel. I just finished setting the table when I saw someone walking up my driveway. It was a man, maybe in his mid-40s, wearing a tattered coat and a beanie. His face looked weathered, and he was shivering. I opened the door just a crack, enough to ask him what he wanted. He said his car had broken down a little ways up the road and asked if he could come inside to use my phone. I hesitated. Something about him made me uneasy, but it was freezing outside, and it was Christmas Eve. Against my better judgment, I let him in. He stood by the door while I handed him the phone. He didn't seem to be in a rush to make a call, though. Instead, he kept glancing around the house, his eyes lingering on the Christmas decorations and then on me. I felt exposed under his gaze, but I brushed it off as me being paranoid. He finally dialed a number and mumbled something about needing a tow truck. When he hung up, he didn't leave. He just stood there, staring at me with this unsettling smile. "Nice place you've got," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "You all live here?" "No," I said quickly. "It's just me. My family's visiting for the night." I regretted saying it the moment the words left my mouth. His smile widened. My mom called from the dining room, asking who was at the door. I took the opportunity to tell the man he needed to wait outside for the tow truck. He nodded but didn't move right away. Instead, he leaned in a little closer and said, "Merry Christmas," in a tone that didn't sound cheerful at all. Once he was gone, I locked the door and tried to shake off the unease. Dinner went on as planned, but I couldn't stop glancing at the windows, half expecting to see him standing there in the dark. After my family left, I started cleaning up. That's when I saw it. A note on the kitchen counter, written on the back of a receipt I didn't recognize. "I'll see you when the lights are out." My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone and started dialing the police when, as if on cue, the power went out. The house was pitch black, and the only sound was my own breathing. I locked myself in the bathroom, whispering to the 911 operator about what had happened. They told me to stay put and that officers were on their way. When they arrived, they searched the house from top to bottom. At first, they found nothing, but then one officer called out from the attic. The man was up there, crouched in the corner, clutching a knife. He'd been hiding, waiting for the right moment. The officers arrested him, and I remember one of them telling me how lucky I was. Lucky, that word still haunts me. I don't know what he was planning to do, and honestly, I don't want to know. What scares me most is how easily he got into my house, how easily I let him in. I'll never forget the way he looked at me as they took him away, like he wasn't done, like he was still planning something. My name is Ethan. I'm 24 and I live in a small suburb in Ohio. It's the kind of neighborhood where people decorate their houses to compete for the most festive street. Every Christmas, the whole block glows with lights, inflatable Santas, and snowmen. But there was always one house that stood out, the house at the end of the street, owned by Mr. Clements. Mr. Clements was in his late 70s, and every year he turned his home into a Christmas wonderland. His yard was covered in glowing reindeer, a sleigh on the roof, and enough lights to be seen from miles away. Kids from the neighborhood loved it. Every year, they'd line up to get candy canes from him, dressed as Santa Claus. But this year was different. There were no lights, no decorations, nothing. Mr. Clements' house sat dark and quiet. At first, I figured maybe he wasn't feeling well, or had gone to visit family. But as the days passed, I realized I hadn't seen him at all in weeks. It didn't sit right with me, but I didn't know him well enough to knock on his door. I just kept telling myself it wasn't my business. Then, a few days before Christmas, something strange happened. It was around midnight, and I was taking out the trash. When I glanced at Mr. Clements' house, I saw a light flickering inside, like a flashlight, or maybe a candle. I froze, staring at the window, my breath fogging up in the freezing air. He hadn't been seen in weeks. Who was in his house? Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked across the street. The closer I got, the darker the house seemed. When I reached the porch, I noticed the front door was slightly open. "Mr. Clements," I called softly, but there was no answer. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. The house smelled stale, like it hadn't been aired out in weeks. The living room was a mess, chairs knocked over, a shattered lamp on the floor, and decorations scattered everywhere. It looked like there'd been a struggle. "Hello?" I called again, my voice shaky. I was about to turn back when I heard a creak upstairs. My heart jumped into my throat. Someone was up there. I panicked and ducked into a nearby closet. Through the slats in the door, I could just make out the staircase. The sound of footsteps grew louder, slow and deliberate, until I saw a figure at the top of the stairs. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a red Santa costume. But something about it was off. It was filthy, the white trim stained brown, and the beard hanging loose from his chin. He was dragging a large black garbage bag behind him. It thumped against the stairs as he descended, leaving smudges of something dark on the carpet. I held my breath, clutching my phone so tightly, my fingers hurt. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears as he walked into the living room. He stood there for a moment, looking around, and then he dragged the bag toward the back door. As soon as I heard the door slam, I bolted. I ran out the front door and didn't stop until I was inside my house, locking every door and window. I called the police, barely able to get the words out. When they arrived, they found Mr. Clements' body in the bag, along with rope, duct tape, and blood-stained clothing. The man in the Santa costume was long gone. The police searched for weeks, but never found him. Now, every Christmas, I avoid looking at Mr. Clements' house. Someone new moved in, but it feels cursed. Every time I see a Santa costume, I can't help but think about that night. I'll never forget the sound of that bag dragging down the stairs, or the fear that he might come back. My name is Mia. I'm 29 and live alone in a small apartment in Chicago. It's not the fanciest place, but it's cozy, and I like the independence. Christmas has always been my favorite time of year, even though I've been spending it alone since moving here for work. This year, I decided to make things more festive by ordering a Christmas tree to be delivered. I didn't think much of it at the time. It felt easier than dragging one home myself. The delivery came on the evening of December 23rd. A man named Ray showed up at my door. He was tall, stocky, and had this gruff demeanor that made me a little uneasy from the start. His face was rough, like he'd lived a hard life, and he didn't smile once. I expect him to just drop the tree off and leave, but instead, he insisted on setting it up inside. "Wouldn't want a pretty lady like you struggling with this on your own," he said, forcing his way in before I could respond. Something about his tone felt off, but I didn't want to seem rude. I let him set up the tree while I awkwardly stood near the kitchen, pretending to be busy. As he worked, he started making these strange comments. "It must get lonely in a place like this," he said, glancing around my apartment. "No family around for Christmas?" I tried to brush it off. "I'm used to it," I replied quickly, hoping he'd finish and leave, but he didn't stop. A woman living alone, dangerous in a city like this. You never know who might be watching. That sent a chill down my spine. I told him that I appreciated his help, but that he could leave now. He just smiled and said, "I'll be right back. I forgot something in the truck." He walked out, leaving the door slightly open. I locked it the moment he was gone. Minutes passed, then an hour, but he never came back. I started to relax, thinking he'd just left. I made myself some tea and sat on the couch, staring at the tree, trying to shake off the weird encounter. Around midnight, I was getting ready for bed when I heard a faint noise, like something shifting. It was coming from my bedroom. I froze, listening closely. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I heard it again. A quiet rustling sound coming from under my bed. My heart started pounding. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed out of the apartment, locking myself in the stairwell. I called the police, barely able to get the words out. When they arrived, the officers searched my apartment. One of them called out from the bedroom. "We found him." Ray was under my bed, clutching a roll of duct tape and a length of rope. His face was calm, almost blank, like he wasn't even sorry. They arrested him on the spot. Later, I learned he had a history of stalking and breaking into women's homes. I haven't ordered anything for delivery since that night, and every Christmas I can't help but think about how close I was to something terrible happening. The tree still sits in the corner of my apartment, but now it feels more like a warning than a decoration. My name is Jason. I'm 31 and I live in a small town in Michigan. Christmas is always a stressful time for me because I procrastinate everything. This year was no different. It was Christmas Eve and I was at the mall, rushing to grab last-minute gifts. By the time I was done, the place was nearly deserted. The parking lot was cold and dark, lit only by a few flickering streetlights. My car was parked near the back, far from the entrance, since the lot had been packed earlier in the day. As I walked to my car, the bags in my hands felt heavier with every step. That's when I noticed it. A white van parked unusually close to my car. It wasn't there when I arrived. The van's side door was slightly open, and the sight of it immediately made me uneasy. I told myself I was being paranoid, but something about it didn't feel right. I reached my car, unlocked it, and started loading the bags into the trunk as quickly as I could. My hands were shaking, though I wasn't sure if it was from the cold or nerves. Out of nowhere, a man stepped out of the van. He was tall and heavy-set, wearing a dark hoodie that obscured most of his face. In his hand, he held a crowbar. "Wallet and keys," he said, his voice low and calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. I froze, my mind racing. There was no one else around. My instinct was to run, but I knew he could catch me easily if I tried. Reluctantly, I pulled my wallet and keys from my pocket and handed them over. He grabbed them, but instead of leaving, he turned slightly toward the van, muttering something under his breath. That was my chance. Without thinking, I bolted, leaving the trunk open and my shopping bags behind. I didn't look back. I ran across the parking lot, dodging between cars until I reached the mall entrance. I pounded on the glass doors, hoping someone was still inside. A security guard eventually let me in, and I frantically explained what had happened. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the parking lot and found the van still parked next to my car. Inside, they discovered duct tape, rope, and several knives. The sight of it made me sick. The man, however, was gone. He'd vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but my stolen wallet and keys, which they found discarded nearby. The police later told me the van had been linked to a string of abductions in the area. They believed I was supposed to be the next victim. I haven't been able to shake that night from my mind. Every time I see a white van, my heart races. And every Christmas Eve, I think about how close I came to disappearing forever. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for someone else to let their guard down.